Tonight, we begin with a development that U.S. officials had privately feared, publicly dismissed, and quietly prepared for behind closed doors. A development that didn't unfold gradually or with warning, but instead erupted over the span of a few hours that forced Washington to issue a rare and urgent alert, hours that triggered a rapid military response from Ukraine, and hours that left NATO intelligence analysts stunned, struggling to process movements from Russia unlike anything they've tracked in months. What Russia did today, what appeared on satellite feeds, telemetry data, and radar screens across Europe, crossed a line American officials had hoped would hold. And when that line snapped, Ukraine did not hesitate. They moved immediately, decisively, and unmistakably. And tonight, we are learning just how consequential those decisions may be for the future trajectory of this war. For months now, there had been whispers, not formal intelligence reports, not verified assessments, just whispers. Whispers that Russia was preparing something unconventional, something that didn't fit their earlier patterns. Yes, Russia has been unpredictable, but even in unpredictability, there is often a rhythm, a logic, a pattern, almost a pulse. And what set off the alarms this week was that the pulse went silent. Analysts who monitor Russian troop movements for a living know the signs, the shifts in convoy activity, the movement of fuel supply trucks, the repositioning of electronic warfare units, the sudden drop-off in radio chatter. And when all of that suddenly goes quiet, experience tells them one thing: something very loud is coming next. Early this morning, U.S. Space Command detected what they described as a clustered movement near one of Russia's long-range missile regiments. This included the repositioning of mobile launchers that hadn't been moved in more than a year. These are not assets Russia casually rolls around for drills. When Russia moves these systems, it is a signal. It is a message. And it is almost always an indication of power, escalation, or preparation. Washington didn't yet know which of those categories this movement belonged to or whether it was all three at once. But what they did know was that something significant had changed. And when a nuclear-capable state shifts posture without explanation, even by so much as a mile, Washington pays attention. Tonight's warning from the White House was not routine. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't diplomatic posturing. It was urgent. Senior U.S. officials, emerging from a classified briefing in the Situation Room, described Russia's activity as escalatory, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, deliberately intimidating. Intimidation aimed squarely at Ukraine and at its Western supporters. But intimidation only works when the target hesitates, and Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the fastest we have witnessed in this war. Here's what we know. Within minutes of Russia repositioning those launchers, Ukrainian long-range reconnaissance drones lifted off from multiple locations. These were not the small, short-range UAVs we've seen used routinely on the battlefield. These were deep-reach systems Ukraine deploys only when preparing to strike high-value targets far beyond the immediate combat zone. Washington's warning, it turns out, was not made to reassure the public. It was made to give Ukraine quite literally a window, a small, shrinking window in which to act before Russia could. Tonight, Ukrainian officials confirmed that their forces launched a coordinated strike on several Russian command posts near the front line, including one recently reactivated as part of Russia's new operational planning. Ukraine struck before Russia had the chance to operationalize its next step. They hit radar stations, air defense systems, transport vehicles, everything surrounding Russia's newly repositioned launchers. They targeted the skeleton of the system, the infrastructure that would have supported Russia's next move. And this is why Washington's warning was so critical. Russia's repositioning wasn't for show. It was actionable. It was designed to reshape battlefield dynamics. And Ukraine, aware of this, responded not recklessly, not blindly, but strategically. They didn't target civilian sites. They didn't hit randomly. They hit the nodes of Russia's escalation, the connective tissue. And in doing so, Ukraine sent a message. What we are learning from U.S. officials tonight is that Russia's latest move appears to have been a test, an attempt to measure Western resolve after months of political gridlock in Washington and growing fatigue across Europe. Moscow wanted to know whether the West would blink, whether the United States would hesitate. Instead, the opposite happened. The United States did not blink. They issued a warning so direct, so unambiguous, that even the Kremlin noticed, and that is not easy to do. U.S. intelligence analysts speaking under anonymity described Russia's shift as a probing action, a way to test whether Ukraine's defenses and the world's attention had softened. But today, Ukraine demonstrated not only readiness, but precision. Their strikes were timed so exactly that Russian units were still maneuvering when the first explosions detonated. That level of timing matters. It indicates Ukraine wasn't just reacting to U.S. intelligence, they were tracking Russia themselves, perhaps even more closely. As reports continued to pour in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian jets flew low-altitude runs across contested sectors, forcing Russian units to scatter. Ukrainian artillery hit ammunition depots that had been quietly resupplied just within the last 48 hours. Ukrainian special forces operating far behind Russian lines reportedly sabotaged communications towers essential to coordinating Russian movements. This was not a reply. This was not a counterpunch. This was strategy. This was control. And control is the one thing Russia has struggled to maintain since the early days of this conflict. Remember, Russia believed Ukraine would collapse within days. They believed NATO would fracture. They believed the United States would not sustain support. Yet tonight, as we stand here, the opposite is true. NATO remains more unified than Moscow expected. Ukraine is more resilient than Russia planned for, and Russia is more exposed than they want to admit. What makes this moment so volatile, so uniquely dangerous, is that Russia's latest action comes at a time when Vladimir Putin is under mounting internal pressure. Russian hardliners want escalation. Russian moderates want an end. Russian soldiers want relief. Russian families want explanations. And Putin, caught between these converging demands, is leading a war he once assumed would be finished 2 years ago. Leaders under that kind of strain don't make sudden moves out of strength, they make them out of vulnerability. They make them because the ground beneath them is shifting. Washington's urgent warning, now echoed on every major news network tonight, was meant to signal that the United States will not allow Russia to engineer a new crisis simply to regain momentum. Senior officials stated clearly that Russia's repositioning was inconsistent with stabilizing behavior. In diplomatic language, that translates to, "We see what you're doing, and we are not going to let you get away with it." That tone, sharp, unusually direct, does not come from Washington unless something very serious is in play. Meanwhile, Ukraine's president addressed the nation tonight. In a brief but tense speech, he said Ukraine will not let Russia's escalation dictate the pace of this war. He said Ukraine will respond at a time and place of our choosing. And he said the actions taken today were a demonstration that Ukraine remains sovereign, remains free, remains unbroken. These words were not political ornamentation. They were a declaration, a clear recognition of just how high the stakes have climbed. And here's what's even more concerning. Russia's latest move wasn't isolated. It didn't happen in a vacuum. Alongside the repositioning of those missile launchers, Russian naval units in the Black Sea shifted formation. Russian aircraft along the eastern border flew unusual patterns. Russian cyber units dramatically increased activity against Ukrainian energy systems. All of this occurred within a single 24-hour window. When Russia moves multiple pieces at once, historically, it means something larger is underway. U.S. analysts tonight are weighing several possibilities. Possibility 1. Russia is preparing a new offensive. Possibility 2. Russia is trying to force Ukraine to divert resources away from its ongoing counteroffensive. Possibility 3. The most troubling Russia may be attempting to coerce the West into a negotiation from a position of fear. But today, Ukraine removed that leverage. They didn't negotiate, they didn't delay. They met escalation with resistance, fast, coordinated, and effective. What we're watching now is a contest of endurance. Russia wants to see how far Ukraine will go. Ukraine wants to show how far it has already come. The United States wants to keep this conflict contained, preventing it from spilling into a broader regional crisis. And NATO wants to ensure that Russia doesn't interpret escalation as its only remaining pathway. Tonight, Pentagon officials confirmed they are tracking Russia's movements hour by hour. They report that additional Russian units have started relocating near the northeastern front. Supply convoys are moving with a speed not seen in months. And Russia's decision to adjust missile posture appears to be part of a larger intimidation strategy, an effort to pressure Ukraine into slowing its progress. But Ukraine is not slowing. In fact, they are accelerating. Their response today, precise and powerful, sent two crystal clear messages. To Moscow, Ukraine will not be coerced. To Washington, Ukraine remains disciplined, capable, and ready to defend itself even under the most dangerous conditions. As the night unfolds, more clarity will emerge about what Russia hoped to achieve with this sudden move. But what we already know is this: Washington's warning was timely. It gave Ukraine an advantage, a crucial edge in those critical first minutes. It denied Russia the element of surprise. And it underscored that the United States remains deeply engaged in preventing this conflict from spiraling into something far more catastrophic. The next phase now depends on what Russia does in the next 48 hours. If they pull back, this will likely be remembered as an attempt at pressure, one that failed. If they escalate, the US and Ukraine have already shown they are prepared to respond. And here's what's perhaps most telling. Tonight, Russia appears to be recalculating. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Russia falls silent, it usually means they're rethinking their next move. Because tonight, Russia has been reminded once again that Ukraine will not fold, the United States will not vanish, and the world will not simply sit back while Russia attempts to redraw borders by force. This story is far from over. In many ways, this may only be the beginning of the next phase. But what is unmistakably clear tonight is this: Washington's warning changed the calculus. Ukraine's response changed the battlefield. And Russia's move, whatever it was meant to achieve, has already triggered consequences Moscow may not have anticipated. Tonight, the world watches. The next hours will set the stage for what comes next. And we will be here, tracking every detail, as this unfolding chapter reshapes the balance of power in a war that has already rewritten so much